And a very good evening to you, and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. It's Wednesday, our midweek edition of Politics 101. I'd like to welcome all of you to the program. Please do as you should remember to do, and that is to share the link and let everyone know that we are on. It's Wednesday, and we're going to be sharing some perspectives on the issues of today. Continuing our discussion, would like to welcome all of you onto the program. Good evening to you in Linden. Many thanks to you who reached out to me because of the program we did on Monday night with Apostle Nigel London, focusing on Linden as the PPP seeks to use Linden as one of its one of the locations for its electoral strategy. We believe that everything from here on is going to hang on the coming elections. And so we started that discussion last week, and we are going to continue that discussion. Elections are important. We recognize that. It's a very important plank of the democratic process. It is not the sum total of democracy. Elections in themselves are not necessarily the solution to everything. You can have elections that lead to more instability. You can have elections that lead to dictatorship. So elections are important, but we have to put them in a perspective. For us in Guyana, the question that we have to ask ourselves is whether the conditions for fair elections are there. Whether the conditions for fair elections are there. And it means, therefore, that we have to fight for better conditions so that we can have better elections, even as we try to mobilize for the elections. A wonderful good evening to those of you who are joining us from the Caribbean, the wider Caribbean, our Caribbean, from Jamaica and the Bahamas right up there in the north, right through to the Windward and Leeward Islands, coming through to Trinidad, in the South and Tobago, and of course Barbados, which is out there, as east as we could get, Welcome. And to all of you joining us from North America, from the United States of America, from Canada, even those of you who are in Mexico or thereabout, welcome to Politics 101. We are never ever going to forget those who are joining us from Europe, in particular, those who are joining us from the United Kingdom, Great Britain, whether you are in that part, or England, as most of you are. Welcome to Politics 101. Good night, good morning, because it is getting past midnight around this time. 11 o'clock and getting close to midnight. Welcome to Politics 101. Those of you who are joining us from France. Good night. And I'm not forgetting those on the South American continent, Suriname, French Guyana. Some of you are there in Venezuela, Brazil, where people are all over the place. Welcome to Politics 101 on Wednesday night. We are continuing our discussion on the critical issues that are facing us. And we are trying to put ourselves in a place where we are able to come out up front of the PPP. Our thesis is that the PPP is busy working out an electoral strategy. And that electoral strategy includes trying to get as many votes from as many places as possible. some of those votes, as we saw in 2020, were manufactured. Are they going to be able to manufacture votes in the same way as they did in 2020? We think that their strategy is going to differ somewhat. But there is a grand strategy from the PPP to capture the upcoming elections. And we are saying we've got to be in front of that. We've got to stop them from illegally getting votes. But at the same time, the opposition has to be ready with its own strategy for getting votes. Winning elections in Guyana has now become quite a thing. It's not like in the old days. It's not like in the old days. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. So welcome to Politics 101. It's Wednesday, and Wednesday morning I'm on Guyanese morning time and with Brother Kidaki, and some of you wake up early to catch that, and some of you don't. From those of you who catch it, I was on this morning, and for those of you who didn't catch it, let not your heart be troubled, because we are going to be playing parts of my comments and perspectives this morning on the program. It's Wednesday. We call it Wednesday Hindsight with me, with Dr. Hines, and we are going to be sharing that with you. So please share the link and let everyone know that Politics 101 is on quite a range of issues we are going to be discussing. Hello to all the regulars. Hello Desiree. Hello, how are you? It's been quite a while. Rastaman is always present. How about the Bostonian posse? Welcome to Politics 101. My good friends, Flash Gordon, up there on the quarantine, Mr. Vibert White on the East Bank, all my wonderful friends in Linden, coming through the East Coast, right through West Bobis. On the West Coast, nice people on the west side, and all the wonderful people out there on the Essequibo coast, and the Essequibo Islands. Welcome to Politics 101. This week we have been talking a lot about equality, equal rights and justice. And, Singing Francine has been singing for us this week. Everyone is born equal, and with an equal right to be born and an equal right to equal right to live, and an equal right to be living, and so we are here. Welcome to Politics 101. I'd like to thank all of you who are taking the time to come on down. So we are going to begin our program. We are going to begin our program anytime now.
Don't waste too much time. I promise this year to behave myself and, try to maximize the use of the time that Dr. Hines is giving us, because it's a sacrifice he makes. Now is 17 past 7 here. It might just be 17 past 3 where Dr. Hines lives. Professor, morning. Welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning.
I know if my time calculation right, it's 17 past 4 in your area.
17 past 4, yes. 3 hours behind.
But some people now taking the first turning and and Europe. Thank you for your sacrifice as usual. All right, so a lot of things happening. A lot of things have happened and will continue to happen. From last week to now, we see a lot of things happening. We see Ralph Gonzalez holding Venezuela map that got Guyana as part of it. We also see shortly after you and I spoke last week about the possible election date, the so-called vice president had his usual Thursday cuss out and mentioned that elections are likely to be sometime late next year. I think around November time. Did we preempt the man? As we like to say in Guyana, we force the hand over.
I wish we had the wherewithal to do that. No, I think what we did last week before his announcement is normal political punditry and observation, because it was clear, as I said last week, from the projects that they were putting in stream, there was no way that they were putting those projects on stream for an election this year. Clearly, those projects are meant to come to fruition next year. And my theorization then and my theorization now is that they indeed intended to go to election this year. And they wanted to do that with the electoral machinery in place. However, that electoral machinery is now under tremendous scrutiny, not just by forces in Guyana, but by international forces. And so it is very difficult to go to an election with the voters list as it is, with the arrangements at GCOM as they are. And so they couldn't get away with it. If they could have gotten away with it, they would have gone to election this year. If you are giving up a year and more of your term, it has to be because you are very sure that you are going to win. I can only think in the English-speaking Caribbean. I can only think of one instance where an early or snap election was called and they lost. And that was when Patrick Manning in 1995 called an election 1 year earlier than he should have, and then promptly lost to Bastille Pandey's UNC. Other than that, I cannot think of any other instance in recent times in the English-speaking Caribbean where a government calls an early election or a snap election and lost it. And the PPP, of course, are smart enough not to go down that road. So they can't go to voters. The other thing that one could theorize is that perhaps they see a possibility where if they hold the election later rather than earlier, of maximizing their position. Remember last week, I kind of went through, from my standpoint, how the PPP intends to win the coming election. One, as I said, by running up the Indo-Guyanese vote, increasing the turnout, and that's one. The Amerindian votes getting 50 to 60% of the Amerindian votes, and then you have to search for a few more seats to get you over, because you're not going to get over with just the Indian and the Amerindian votes. African votes, you're going to try to buy those, but the possibility of getting a seat out of that is relatively far-fetched. So perhaps they are looking at the influx of Venezuelans. And I heard you, I guess that's the tail end of your yesterday's program, talking about the instructions that they have given to register Venezuelans. Now, if you go to the elections next year, you give yourself more time to take advantage of the Venezuelans that are coming and will continue to come over the border. So I'm theorizing again that you're giving, if you're the PPP, you're giving yourself the widest chance of accumulating as many seats as you can legally and not so legally. And there's time. So I really think that they're still searching for another 2 seats or so, and the Venezuelans coming over the border, give them the opportunity to do that, but it means that you have to extend the elections much later. So I think it's part of the PPP's modus operandi and trying to put together an electoral strategy. And not, as I pointed out last week, one of the problems, and I think Rhonda took me to task, and I didn't explain myself enough, because she seemed to think that I was saying that we lost the 2020 election. But I continue to say I don't know who win the 2020 election. I don't, because it's tied up in the courts and it's a disputed election. But the point is that in a situation where you have a bloated voters list of 200,000 names, extra names on the list, to siphon off a 10,000, which is a 2-seat, or a 5,000, which is a 1-seat, is relatively easy to do behind the scenes. You're going to get caught, as happened with the recount, but you're going to get caught after the fact. And my theory is that in 2020, the coalition suffered as a result of PPP's rigging before election day. But my argument is that the turnout among opposition supporters being, let's say, 85 instead of 76 and 77, it would have been enough to nullify the PPP's rigging before election day. I hope I'm making myself clear, right? You see, Guyana's election is becoming very sophisticated, almost like the American election situation. And I mentioned the Southern strategy, where the Republicans figured out how to win presidential elections, run up the score in the South, 90-10, split the white vote in the North, 50-50 or 60-40, and that was enough to win without African Americans and Latinos. That was enough to win without African American Latinos. And it is that I think the PPP has very good advisors who are advising them how to win an election part fairly and part unfairly. You see, in America, when Obama was able to upset that, because Obama then figured out, run up the score among African Americans, run up the score among Latinos, and then take 40% of the white vote. And that's what he won with. That's what he won with. He won with 40% of the white vote the first time around, 39% the second time around. But he ran up the African American score. African Americans generally, in any case, vote for Democrats 89, 90. Obama was able to run that up to 97, 98. And then he ran up the Latino score from 50 that the Democrats used to have to 70 something. And then he took the so-called ethnic white vote. That is the Jews and Catholics and so on. And he was able to use that formula to overcome the Southern strategy. Where am I going with this? If we understand what the PPP strategy is, because the PPP strategy is both legal and illegal. You see, they're giving themselves every chance to win the elections legally, but recognizing that that would be a problem. And so they then have that illegal strategy. The point is the opposition has to come up with its own strategy. And as I have argued, their strategy can't be crossover. You can't start with crossover vote. The PPP is working out a strategy to win without the black vote. Let's be clear about that. They're going to try to buy some black votes, and they may get a half a seat, a quarter seat, but they're not pinning their strategy on that. The mistake the opposition is making, at least on the surface, is that they are starting with crossover vote. Rather than see the crossover vote as a gravy where you can pick up a quarter seat there or a half seat. And that is the difference between the PPP and the PNC. The PPP does not start with crossover vote. It is sensible enough to realize that. It's nonsense. It doesn't mean they're not going after crossover vote. What they're doing is that they're trying to buy some crossover votes. But they're not pinning their strategy on that, in the sense that they are trying to win an election without that crossover vote. Whereas the opposition is signaling to us that the crossover vote is central to their strategy. I think it's bad for the politics. That's my long answer to your short question. The timing of the election, I think, has to do with the PPP's calculation that it does not have enough votes to win an election in 2024. And so by throwing the election to 2025, it gives itself a wider chance of accumulating the seat. If you talk to PPP strategists now, they're going to tell you how many seats they have in the bag, because they know where the votes are right now, and they know how many votes they have to have. And those infrastructure that they're doing, those things, because that's what they're going to tell their supporters. Look what we have done. Look how many roads we have built. Look how many we have modernized the country. When your family, they come from Canada, the roads and so on and so forth and so forth. And Indian people are going to say to them, some of them will say, well, we didn't benefit from those roads. And then they're going to say to them, but look what we give sugar workers. Look what we give rice farmers. Look what we did. And some are going to say, well, we didn't benefit from that. Well, look what we give the business class. So you see what the PPP is doing. It is covering all its bases to ensure that it secures its votes. And I am saying that we on the opposition side, we have to start by figuring out where our votes are, how many seats we have, and how many seats we have to get, and where we're going to get it from. Now, I'm going to say something that may be controversial here. And I think you were hinting at that. Look, if Venezuelans are here and they're regularized, the PPP has relaxed they've relaxed the requirements of citizenship. So it's easy for people coming from Venezuela and Colombia and so on to become citizens. There's nothing we can do about that unless we change the law. Are we in that immigrant community trying to get some votes there? Or are we at this stage trying to say the law, the relaxed law, is wrong? Well, you know, we don't have the votes in parliament to overturn the law. Are we in that community trying to get a couple of seats out of that community? You see, the PPP showed in 2020 that they stole a seat from people who lived overseas but could come home and vote. They weren't there, but the PPP got a seat from those who weren't there. I bet my bottom dollar this time around The PPP is not going to go for that strategy because they get skin up. They are going to try to get those people home now. Because they tried the last time for them to stay where they are and get their votes count. They got skin up because of the recount. I think this time they're going to try to get those people home. Is the opposition looking at people like myself, who are eligible to vote in Guyana, but live overseas, at least part of the time? So it is those strategies that I think the PPP has nailed down that I am not sure. And let me say I'm not sure because I am not on the in. I'm not on the, we are outside, the WPA is outside of the APNU AFC coalition. We are not in parliament. We are not in the APNU. So we are not part of the mix. So I don't know. But I'm saying from the out, looking at it from the outside, I don't get that sense that clinical strategization is taking place, largely because I think the premise of the opposition is not spot on. The opposition is starting with crossover vote, and I think that's a flaw.
Thank you. Thank you for that explanation. According to you, that long answer, but it certainly brings clarity to the whole discourse in terms of the numbers and where the numbers are. I totally agree with you. Excuse me. Y'all excuse me. I'm going to be clear in my throat. I don't know who is this. And it's not nothing I did. Something was done to me, perhaps. Yeah. The whole approach in terms of getting the numbers. I totally agree with that analysis that, the PPP is necessarily going to be consolidating these strongholds and trying to win votes from the APNU areas, the coalition areas. And part of the evidence of that strategy, I think, is the fact that they have now gone to Linden. That bridge that they didn't want to build in Linden, that the coalition had initiated, a number of bridges in the region 9, region 10 area, the coalition had started. And the replacement of that single lane bridge in Linden, where the Brits had provided finance through the DFID. I don't know if you remember, while in opposition, the PPP said they were going to reject the project. And the Brits had to be harsh on them and tell them, well, after they got into government, if you all reject this project, we're going to withdraw this 75 million US grant and among other funding, I think. So they have finally, from 2020 to now, in 2024 is when Ali rushed up to Linden, I think last weekend, and announced some signing for some commencement of construction.
But let me disappoint you. Let me disappoint you a little bit there.
Yes.
That bridge is not meant for Linden. That bridge is meant for business people who are doing all that stuff in the interior, logging and bricks and all those kinds of things. That bridge is meant for the PPP business people.
But I will allow you to continue that explanation. But I'm using that, right? Because Ali is not going to, and the PPP is not going to tell the Lindeners, we doing this bridge to benefit our business friends. Right? They're singing the song that we doing this bridge because we care.
Yes.
Right? So I'm happy to make that differentiation. And so you can continue. Let's understand your reading of that situation there.
Yes,
and what the opposition perhaps needs to do to get Lindeners to understand, because it would appear as though Lindeners have become gullible to the PPP, to understand that this is not your benefit.
Well, I don't want to say that people are gullible thing. You're gullible insofar as you are hearing one narrative and there's not another narrative. You see? And that's what I think needs to happen here. That bridge is twofold. On the one hand, is to remember what the PPP is trying to do in the Black community. They are not trying to win 1 million votes in the black community. What they're trying to do is to sow doubts in the minds of our supporters, to get them alienated from the opposition as a do-nothing opposition. And so therefore, when you become alienated, you become easier pickings for those who are trying to buy some votes. Now, most people are not going to sell their votes, but they could become so alienated that they're turned off from the process. Hence, they're not going to register and they're not going to vote. The PPP strategy is not to win 1 million black votes. They know that. They know it's not going to happen. Right? But they are playing on people's mind. When you're in the opposition, you can't do nothing for your supporters. You can't do nothing for your supporters. When you are in opposition, your job is to puncture the wheels of the government in the eyes of your supporters. That is why I always get so, teed off when I hear opposition MPs talking about Indian people suffering. You're helping the PPP when you say that. Because the PPP is going to go to those communities and say, you hear what they said? You are suffering? Okay. We're going to give you all in West Bobby's 30-something roads. I don't think the opposition needs to make the PPP's case that it's not doing nothing in Indian areas. It gives the PPP the excuse to go and put resources in Indian areas. I think you have to make the case that is in your areas. Resources are not your supporters' areas. You see, you have to do high politics in these days, right? So you have to be in your community, your communities, constantly puncturing the PPP's narrative. And the narrative to the Lindeners is that we are doing this for you. And the opposition response is that, well, we started. I think that's a good part response. The other part of the response is what I'm giving you now. You're not doing this for us. We are likely to benefit from it because you're going to get some toll and so on. That's how Linden is going to benefit from it. But if you have a PPP town clerk, and it's a town clerk that's going to run the money that's coming from that. And so forth. You have to be constantly there doing it for your supporters. Now, here is where what you are doing and Rickford Burke and Ben Shop and others are doing. We are on every day of the week. And we are puncturing the holes. Because whereas the opposition has to wait until they go for a walk around in Linden, we're walking around in Linden every single day. So we are puncturing the holes. However, the formal opposition now has to go. After we puncture the holes, they have to go and translate that into political capital. And insofar as we have a criticism of them, they're not doing that. Now, are they walking about in the communities? I am sure they are. But politics is as much about optics as about tangibles. If you are not all in rallies and big meetings, open air meetings, where your people in the public space can come out in their hundreds and their thousands and use their bodies, their physical body as a process, as a form of protest, as a form of pressure, then the work that you are doing behind the scene is not manifested to others. those who are alienated in Linden, if they see every 2 months the opposition got some big event where they put in 2,000, 3,000 people on the street, they are going to be moved to say, look, the opposition is gaining some steam, and that alienation will decrease. So you see, it is where the PPP, I think, is so far ahead of us, understandably, because they have state power. And they're able to bring to bear our money, our institutions, whether it's the police, the army, they have all those things at their disposal to use in service of the party. It's hell being in the opposition. And that is why when you're in the opposition, you have to find creative ways to destabilize the government's nonsense. You see? And I think that's where I think the opposition, we are not working hard enough. We're not, but partly I think I don't think we are analyzing. Somebody wrote me from Canada this past week and was asking me if I note that when I come on to your program in the morning or when I do my own program, that one of the things people are saying is that I am breaking it down, I'm explaining it, and so on. And that person said that makes a difference between sitting on the fence and getting involved, because when we break it down, we are giving people a reason to get involved. And so I think the analysis is so important. It is very important in making the analysis. You're not going to be always spot on, but at least you have something in mind. You have something in mind. If the opposition every day keep hammering away at the WPA's cash transfer, the so-called $1 million thing, you can't go wrong with that. Hammering it every day. Yes, it's WPA's proposal. But does the opposition see any wisdom? The PPP got their cash transfer. And they're using their cash transfer in a way to benefit their supporters and to give them mileage. We have our own cash transfer put forward by the WP. But our opposition is not using it. WPA is the only people who are pushing it. But our voice is not as strong as the white opposition. But you're not hearing the PNC taking it and running with it. And whenever the PNC talks about it, there is always some hesitation. It is simple. The PPP is giving their supporters $250,000, $500,000, $1 million, and they're giving our supporters $20,000 and $40,000. We think that is wrong. We are going to give all citizens $1 million. In giving all citizens $1 million, we are ensuring our supporters get $1 million. But the opposition doesn't embrace it because it's the all bad mind politics. You know, if it then come from you know, I mean, we have a lot of work to do in the opposition in understanding how to win elections. And the days The days of winning election a certain way in Guyana are over. They're over. The winning election now has to become a science. After what happened in 2020, the scope for rigging in a certain way is narrowed, which means the PPP is going to start search for new ways of rigging. And you have to be up on that. You have to see where they're going with the new ways of rigging. And you have to put obstacles in their way, while at the same time creating legitimate ways of getting vote for yourself. You know, in the old days where, you know, you just rig an election and that's it. These days, even when you're rigging, you have to have also legitimate ways of getting votes. Because the rigging is not always certain. You see? So there's a lot of work to be done. And you know, it's I don't think Linden people are gullible. I not for one moment. I think Linden people don't have an alternative narrative pounding in their heads every day.
Thank you. Part of that strategy part of the election 2025 strategy, given the announcement by Jack Dio, is Pompeo there to help to plan that strategy?
I don't know that. Pompeo doesn't have to come here to help to plan the strategy.
Because I noticed earlier in the week an announcement that Pompeo is here.
Yeah.
What private business Pompeo could be having in this country?
I am just saying that ipso facto, you can't say, well, Pompeo is coming to help them to read. Pompeo may help them to read, we don't know. But to say the visit thing, that I'm saying that if a man is helping me to read, I don't want him to come here. I want him to stay in the shadows. Why am I making that point? I'm making the point to say that we have to cover all bases. Pompeo played a particular role in 2020. Pompeo is no longer in active politics. Pompeo, however, as an organization that is electing conservative candidates across America, is in the business of winning elections for the Republicans. That's what that's his day-to-day business. All right? That's his organization. He has money doing that. All right? In trying to win election for conservatives. Right? Now, our politics in Guyana is not conservatives versus progressives and so on. Our thing is Indians and Africans and Amerindians and so forth. Could Pompeo be of help there? Yes. Yes. He could be of some help there. Does he have to come to Guyana for that? And I am saying, if he is coming to Guyana for a private visit, there are any number of reasons why he is here. He's part of a long line of Americans who are coming to Guyana, Americans officials in their private capacity, and the Southern Command people, etc., etc. All right? Their economic interests and opportunities in Guyana, that is of particular importance. And if people are coming for economic opportunities and they're given economic opportunities, then those who are giving them the economic opportunities will ask them for something in return. So it is possible that Americans could come here looking for economic opportunities, But in exchange for the economic opportunities, help the PPP politically, because of the PPP, at the end of the day, they want to remain in power. I am not saying that that is what Pompeo is here for, but I'm saying let us broaden our gaze from saying Pompeo just come here to help them to rig an election. I think when you do that, you play into a narrative that sounds conspiratorial. If Pompeo and others are coming here to explore economic opportunities, financial opportunities, which is legitimate. You know, there are opportunities here for firms and companies, international firms and companies. All right? What is the government getting out of it? The government, we know, is interested in political survival. And so I think it is that framework that we have to put to the forefront to try to understand the Pompeos coming here and all the others who are coming. What a warning. What a warning. Yeah. Look, those things, I wouldn't lose sleep over those things. There's a way in which those awards play to power. If you get elected tomorrow, you can go to India and get awards. You know, you have power. You see, when you have power, and when you are sitting on the kind of wealth that we are sitting on, then all forces all over the world are going to come to you. Yes.
It's an inducement. Yes, that's what it is, right. An inducement.
So I wouldn't say, well, why black people are giving Ali an award. No. Everybody's trying to buy their way into some economic,
exactly.
You know, thing. Everybody's trying to do it.
Before we move off of the PPP and this election and so on, and timelines and so on, I have a 5-point contribution here from someone. I think it's 5. It says these are the reasons why an early elections was never on the cards to the PPP. First, no scheduled elections in Guyana have been called earlier as a political strategy. It never happened before. When it occurred, as in the cases of 2001, 2015, and 2020, it was due to enforced circumstances. Second, Jagdeo and the PPP are enraged that their time in office was cut short in the 1997 and 2011 elections. He vowed to get it back. That is why a November date, no later than November 2, 2025, would be 3 months in excess of their full 5-year term, right? But it's allowed under the Constitution. And third, Jagdeo and the PPP have no regard for the opposition. They believe that they will whip them convincingly anytime elections are called. Fourth, their legacy projects, such as the gas to shore and the new Demerara Harbor Bridge, are well beyond schedule. And so they are not about to call early elections when those projects remain unfinished. Fifth, Ali does not intend to give up 1 day of his 5-year term, right? A lot of that I've heard you say in your responses. And so the contributor is saying these things.
There are 2 things I would take issue with. I would take issue with the conclusion that, you know, going to election early in 2024 was not on the cards. I think that's a faulty conclusion. You go to election. The caller, the person is correct. An observation of our history show that snap election and early elections are not part of our political culture or political calculation. The person is spot on when it comes to that. But to make the conclusion that it was never on the cards is really to miss some dynamics. If the PPP call election in December of 2024. They're really not losing much. And the PPP doesn't mind losing 8 months to get 5 years. And I think it was very, very much part on the cards. But I think a lot happened to cause it to not pan out that way. So I would take issue with that conclusion. The other thing I would take issue with is the PPP don't have any regard for the opposition. You know, I mean, we may be vexed with the opposition. It's lethargy, it's sometimes lack of plan, but don't believe the PPP have no regard for the opposition. The PPP has serious regard for the opposition. I think the opposition itself may fall into the mindset of the writer of that missive, in believing that the PPP is not taking them serious. People take them damn serious, because the opposition has as much capital as the PPP. You can say they're not using it as effective as they should. But let me tell you, as somebody who's been in this thing forever, the PPP got regard for every opposition group. They're not going after Burke because they don't have regard for the opposition. They know that what Burke is doing is work for the opposition, and that Burke work is strengthening the opposition, and so it must be. They have serious regard. If you start by saying they don't have regard for the opposition, then your plans will flow from that logic. If you start by saying there is a built-in regard and respect for the opposition, then your plans will flow from that logic. So I think we must not confuse the opposition behavior with the built-in fact of political contestation of two groups in the society that have the capacity to destabilize the other group. The PPP is clear about that. If the opposition wants to destabilize the PPP tomorrow, it can do it. It may choose not to do it because of strategy and tactics. But no. The PPP got serious regard for the opposition, and that won't stop. In the same way, the opposition has serious regard for the PPP. That is a truism. So we have to be very careful not to allow our frustrations to lose sight, to get us to lose sight of realities. Now, having said that, I think the balance of power after the 2020 election shifted. You see, one of the things that has kept Guyana going, surviving, and countries like Guyana, is the balance of power, where both parties have the capacity to manage the other party. And so it's a kind of détente, unspoken détente between the two parties, that there are certain things you don't do. You keep that equilibrium. I think after the 2020 election, the first 2 years, perhaps 3 years, that equilibrium shifted in favor of the PPP, in that the opposition was so weakened, so disunited, so disoriented, that the PPP was ruthless in taking advantage of the space that has been allowed by the disorganization and disorientation of the opposition. But I would think that over the last year, the opposition has been able to cover a lot of the ground and regain a lot of the ground it lost institutionally and otherwise. And critical to that was the outreach to the centers of power internationally. Because it was the centers of power international made the difference in 2020. It was the Americans and the British and CARICOM and all of them who made the difference in 2020. That 1 seat difference or 2 seat difference. And I think over the last year or two, in hammering away at the racism that underpins the government policy, I think it has opened up space for a regaining of a lot of that lost ground. When history is being written, I know the person who coined the term that Guyana is a creeping apart, an emerging apartheid state. I happen to be in the room when that formulation was made. I happen to have been there, and I am prepared to say no. That turned the tide. The PPP has not regained from that punch. They got knocked down. They weren't knocked out, but they got knocked down. The minute we said that, well, I was in the room. I was in the room. I was in the room, right? When the decision was made to go in that direction. And the PPP is bitching to this day. They take away in part of G money, the this, the that. We knocked them down. We knocked them down. So I'm saying we lost a lot of ground because when regime change is done, you will lose ground. And so in the first 2 or 3 years, the opposition lost a lot of ground. But politics is dynamic. And so we've been able to regain ground. And how do you know you have regained ground? You look at the way in which the government is going after you and what they're going after you for and how hard they're coming after you. So the writer of that missive is on point, totally on point. The conclusion, I would say, is a little bit faulty, and I would ask the person to review that thing that the government has no regard for the opposition. They have too much regard for us, given some of the mistakes we've made. But the regard they have for us is not so much in what we are doing, necessarily what we are doing today, because we have a lot more to do. But it has to do with the dynamics of the society. It has to do with the dynamics of the society. I hear we do it because we have to do analysis, you know? And I hear people talk about Black people taking blows, they're not going out on the streets, they're not this. I'm telling you all here this morning, and you all hear me. You all hear me. Black people ain't taking no blows. They ain't taking no blows. Never did in Guyana and never will. Have no fear. Let not your hearts be troubled. I think sometimes the frustration of seeing power being used in such a ruthless way by the PPP, I think make a lot of people panic. Understandably so. I mean, the PPP is ruthless in the way they're using power. And I think people who have a certain view of politics understandably panic. But if you understand African people, what drives them? Black people not taking laws. You may get a little beat up, but that's not loss. You all take it from me and check our history. Whether it's on the slave plantation, we not staying there, we running away, we creating our maroon communities. Whether it's colonialism, black people not taking blows. Black people may take a little beat up. But I think some of us panic. Some of us panic. But I'm here to give you all some good news. Black folks not panic. They're not panicking. Sorry, they're not taking blows. They're getting beat up. But they're not taking blows. If you all think the PPP is going to be able to continue what they're doing for another decade, you all lie.
It would appear that the PPP is treading a little lighter than immediately after the 2020
yes, yeah.
elections and results and so
on. I don't want to get you in trouble, Kidaki. They're not treading a little bit lighter. In fact, they're treading harder.
Well, I say treading a little bit lighter. All right. Depending on which
side. I'm agreeing with you because I know where you're going with it.
Right.
They're going harder, but the returns are lighter.
They seem to want to appease, to some extent, Afro-Guyanese communities.
No. I don't think they're trying to appease. They are reacting to the logic of politics. Well, they're not trying to appease us.
You know what I said?
What they're doing is that they're recognizing the reality that we have been mobilized, we have been radicalized, and we're not taking shit.
You see,
that's what
I choose my words carefully, and that's why I say seem. It would appear as though they are trying to appease the situation. The question I'm about to ask is the fact-finding mission that was here not so long ago that the PPP dismissed and refused to meet with and so on. By now, we perhaps are smelling in the air. The reports might be approaching. You think that has anything to do with the behavior of the PPP?
That by itself doesn't. No one thing by itself affects the PPP or any political force for that matter. It's a confluence of force of factors. We have to understand that it's a confluence of factors. If the fact-finding mission by itself came here and look around and write a report, it won't have the same kind of impact on the PPP's behavior. But it is the fact-finding mission, along with Rick Forberg's meeting, along with Kidaki Amsterdam and Duncan and Denshop and others, mobilizing people on a daily basis, along with the fact that Black people in Guyana are now more racially conscious of their discrimination as a race. It is all of those factors put together that makes the fact-finding mission very important. Because the fact-finding mission, when it provides its report, which I think is going to find the government racially guilty, when it finishes that report, it has the wherewithal to funnel the findings of that report into the veins of American government. And that is greatly important. But there would have been no fact-finding mission if Coffee 250 had not said, this is an emerging apartheid state. And got the PNC leadership to repeat it, something that the PNC leadership don't repeat easily. The PNC would normally say, well, there is racial discrimination, but Indian people are being discriminated too. But the PPP has been, the PNC has been forced to use the word apartheid, which enrages the PPP. And you see, politics are as much about policies and theories as they are about simple things that people can look at and say, oh yeah, I see myself in that mirror. When we say apartheid, when we say it's an emerging apartheid state, it's a word that our people are literate about. And we gave them something to measure their own experiences on a daily basis by. The rest is history. I was in that room when the decision was made to go there.
Thank you. I want to read what I would consider the final comment from the previous contributor on those 5 points. And then perhaps you could take a quick look at an election year budget. I don't know if you want to address that, but let me say the contributor says, I agree with everything Dr. Hines said. However, the specific point as regards PPP having no regard for the opposition was made in the context of what the PPP perceives to be the opposition's ineffectiveness. My point was made against the background of a Hoyt-led opposition versus the one being led by the incumbent. Yes, the opposition has had some success internationally, thanks largely to the diaspora. But locally, what has the opposition accomplished in terms of keeping the government accountable, upholding the rule of law, electoral changes, etc.? That's the essence of my conclusion, that the PPP has no regard for the opposition. It's not a view I'm persuaded to change at this time. So that was...
I still think that that the conclusion needs to be thought through a little bit more. Hoyt would have loved to have had Mark Bishop every night at 9 o'clock, David Hines at 7 o'clock, Sherrod Duncan at 8 o'clock, Kilaki at 5 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, whatever time you come out. And you have the others, you know, Rickford Burke, Paul Slow. Hoyt would have loved to have that. That he did what he did without that. Is testimony to his own courage as a leader, but it's also testimony to the space he had. He had just come out, the PNC had just come out of 28 years of power. And it was there from 92 to 2002 when he died. And so the space, the political space and political muscle that the PPP brought with it, the PNC brought with it from the 28 years in power, Hoyt had that at his disposal. He had political capital at his disposal. His people were not as demoralized because there wasn't regime change in the same way. And so Hoyt could get 10,000 people on the street every single day. He had political capital because he came out of power after 28 years. Let us come to the present. The coalition had power for 5 years. They weren't allowed to govern effectively in that 5 years. They were undermined. They were overthrown. Regime change internally and externally. They didn't have much capital to take with them when they got into opposition. And so we have to be very careful when we are making these comparisons. We have to look into the politics and the sociology. We have to look into the factors before we can make these grand conclusions. You see, it's the conclusion that I am having difficulty with, right? You know, it's not necessarily the analysis. I agree with the analysis, but what I'm saying, the analysis needs to broaden. You're always going to run into trouble. Comparing Hoyt in 1997 with Norton in 2020, 2021. There are some similarities, but I submit there are great dissimilarities. And the forces of change. Hoyt, had he been here in 2020, would have had to confront what Norton confronted. Because he would have been dealing with a different world. Now, would Hoyt have used the situation more effectively? We can debate that. We can debate that. We can debate that because that comes down to political acumen and political vision and so on. We can debate that. Whether Hoyt, given what Norton has to work with, whether Hoyt would have squeezed a little bit more out of it than Norton squeezed. We can debate that. But don't believe that Hoyt would have had a cakewalk, a walk in the park after what happened in 2020. After what happened in 2020, I mean, it's serious. Serious. And that is why good politicians, good political thinkers, try to avoid what happened in 2020. Because once what happened in 2020 happened, it shocks and shockwave through the system. And I think we are in the opposition. You see, if we confine the opposition to Norton and the PNC, the report card is going to be understandably as the viewer is. The report card will not be as nice as we want it to be. But if we see the opposition as wider than Norton and the PNC, and as part of a larger movement, then the report card is better. I think that last point I want to hammer in. If we confine, and I rather suspect that the viewer is confining opposition to the formal opposition. My brother or sister, you are making a grave mistake in doing that. The PPP, that is not lost on the PPP. Again, I have to use Rickford Burke's name. They're not going after Rickford Burke for stupidness. The opposition today is a different opposition from Hoyt time. And so when we are putting together a report card, we have to put together a report card, which I rather suspect is what the viewer is doing, a report card for the narrow opposition as opposed to the wider opposition.
Thank you. Yes, I was saying that we know that at least we're projecting this is the election year. So we got a budget coming Monday. I think there will be that budget. You anticipate a lot of goodies and things for the public services, huh? As an
I anticipate a continuation of the PPP's emphasis in terms of, look, a budget is basically money that you intend to spend, as opposed to money, well, not opposed, in relationship to money that you expect coming in. This is how much I intend to spend. This is how much I expect coming in, whether it's coming in through taxes or selling oil and so on and so forth. And this is how I intend to spend it. And there will be nothing in that budget that should surprise us, because it's going to continue the logic of previous budgets, which is to spend money in areas of the economy that the PPP will benefit from politically. and that it will not spend money in areas that will not bring political benefits to it. The PPP is clear. Their budgets are based on their manifesto. Their manifesto is a manifesto for them, half the population. You do your budget to say, this is what I will do when I get into power. But when you get into power, you're no longer just representing your party. A manifesto is a party document. You have to then locate that manifesto or adopt that manifesto to the wider needs of the society. That is why people always say, you know, you campaign in poetry, but you govern in prose. You know, and the PPP has campaigned in poetry and probably governing in poetry, although it's bad poetry. I don't want to insult poets. So no, I don't think there's anything to shout about in that budget. I don't think.
Thank you.
It's going to be a bigger budget than the one last year because they're going to give themselves opportunity to spend a lot of money. They have, after this budget, they have one more budget before the election. Here I am. Sorry, I muted myself and think. But there you have it. That's my take on the issues, some of the issues as they relate to strategy and tactics, as they relate to the PPP, to us in the opposition, and so forth. We, as you can tell, I am taking the position that we have a lot of work to do. We are doing work, but we have a lot of work to do. And the politics are quite fluid, and we have to make sure that we keep up. I just want to thank all of you for coming out again this evening. Tomorrow evening, we're going to continue our discussion. I think our Professor Clive Thomas is going to join me tomorrow evening. And we hope to have Pato Patterson. He's been making a lot of news because he's been keeping them hopping in terms of the procurement and some of those related issues. We hope to have him here before the end of the week. So I want to thank you all for coming out and staying with us another evening. And I am going to see you all tomorrow evening. Love, always.